Chapter 26. Anna Pavlova has never been remembered for having harbored any sentimental affections towards the human race. However, the great ballerina will never be forgotten for the almost supernatural bonding that took place between herself and her pet swans. The elegant creatures who, like Pavlova herself, were known to display deep feelings of aggression and outright contempt for human beings, nevertheless adored the fragile dancers demonstrably as she studied them closely on her own private lake and interpreted their graceful and aesthetic movements into her most poignant and justly famous dance. It can only be surmised, therefore, that Pavlova's uncharacteristic compassion for the plight of Jean Noel might have arisen from her own familiarity with having died young of a sudden illness. After all, subsequent to only 3 days of flu-like symptoms, she herself succumbed to pleurisy at the preternaturally early age and at the height of her career. Then again, it could very well have come from the fact that she, like Jean Noel, throughout her entire illustrious and abbreviated life, never knew the identity of her own father. Hoping to slip away unnoticed from the memorial service, Zouzou had taken the precaution of booking a checker cab well in advance to pick her up at the meditation garden with the natural spring-fed lake and to take her to LAX for her return flight to Paris. She had brought her suitcase with her, and at her service even now stood with it on the periphery of the crowded courtyard as she kept a vigilant lookout for the cab's arrival, when just such a vehicle lurched violently into view and came to a screeching halt just yards away from where she stood. She was horror-stricken to behold the bathrobe-clad Jean Noel fall out of the back door. "Mignon, Mignon," she cried as she ran to him in panic. "What are you doing here? You should be in the hospital." "Don't be silly, Zouzou," Jean Noel unsteadily replied. "I checked myself out. I couldn't miss Natalie's funeral for anything. Am I too late?" Seeing Jean Noel in this compromised state aroused Zouzou's heart not only pity, but also a far from negligible amount of guilt. Remembering that she had asked Christie to postpone his telling the truth to Jean Noel until after her departure, Zouzou realized then that they could not wait a moment longer. Bracing herself for the worst, she began, "Mon cher, there is something grave and important I have never told you." "Save it, Zouzou," Jean Noel said, with a nonchalant wave of the back of his hand. "Why bother now?" "But I am your mother, mon petit," she protested in a small, barely audible voice. "Oh, Zouzou," Jean Noel said, not unaffectionately, "tell me something I don't already know. Par exemple, tell me who my father actually was. Even if he was a terrible brute or a cad, I'd still like to know his name." It was at that moment that Blaise, Natalie, Christie, and Lord Byron all arrived breathlessly on the scene, and just in time to hear Zouzou pronounce loudly and with sudden vehemence, "Do not dare to say such things about your father. His name, if you must know, is Christophe O'Keefe. And while I may not ever have had much in common with him, he at least is noble and true to himself, whereas I," and here her voice faltered momentarily before summoning the courage to go on, "I am nothing but a coward and a hypocrite." No sooner had these self-damning words passed Zouzou's lips than a bark of the lowest decibel possible was heard to emanate from somewhere exceedingly deep within Lord Byron's soul. These words of self-contempt, spoken by the goddess of the great dog's idolatry, were more, it seemed, than Lord Byron could ostensibly bear to hear. Rushing to Zouzou's side, on the ground beneath Jean Noel, he commenced to lick her face profusely, for, indeed, salty tears were streaming down her cheeks. But if Zouzou seemed oblivious to Lord Byron's touching ministries of symphony, the scene was made all the more heartrending as Jean Noel realized that the reason for this slight was because Zouzou could not, in fact, see the magnificent dog at all. And yet, perhaps without even realizing it, She somehow sensed his presence, for with her very next breath she said, "You must come to Paris again one day, and if you see Lord Byron's grave..." I had a beautiful headstone carved for him with a special inscription beneath his name. Then looking directly at Christie, she finished her sentence, as if for her erstwhile Saviour's benefit alone. It says, "Great Pan can never die." "I suspect I'll come sooner than you think," Jean Noel reassured her. "Alice and I might even elope there for the fun of it." "There's my ride to the airport," Zouzou said abruptly, and in response to the honk from the checker cab that had pulled up to the gate, "Au revoir," she murmured, as she hastily brushed away her tears, grabbed her suitcase, only to head off in its direction. Confused by her sudden departure, Lord Byron followed meekly on her heels, and watched dejectedly as she climbed into the cab without him, then sat forlornly at the gate after the cab's leave-taking before dissolving into thin air. Strangely enough, before Jean Noel was even able to acknowledge Natalie's presence, she too had dissolved. All of these eerie vanishings coincided with the appearance of Alice, Helena, Lysander, who had proceeded to bundle Jean Noel and Blaise snugly into the vintage navy blue VW bug and take them safely home. Christie, Elizabeth, Gwen, and Peter had meanwhile boarded the patiently waiting yellow VW Westphalia, waved a heartfelt goodbye to the barrel-chested monastic with the Gallic accent and his little black cat, who bid them all a fond farewell upon exiting at the gate. Only Pavlova, it seemed, lingered at the spring-fed lake after all the funeral guests had gone, for the ballerina and the swans had managed to find each other, and in the moonlight, long after all the candles had burnt out, she cradled them in her arms and sang them lullabies.